live in Facebook. Again, your questions and answers will be used in the chat box in the Q&A portion, and we will get to them at the end of our expert panel discussion. And we're live. I'd like to thank you all for coming in to today's meeting, press conference, and briefing. I'd like to introduce and kick this meeting off with Urban Global Health Alliance's CEO, Kevin Jenkins.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you have a great day today. Thank you for attending our webinar and our press conference. I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis of who I am and a brief synopsis of the Urban Global Health Alliance. My name is Kevin Jenkins. I'm the CEO. The Urban Global Health Alliance was created several months ago to create an opportunity for families around the country to have a real institution that we're going to be supporting them in the efforts of their health. Our focus is building healthy communities. Our focus is bridging the gap between what's happening in our community, what's happening around the country. And I think that this particular press conference is the first start of us working tirelessly to make sure that our families and communities around this country have the right voice in the middle of this tyrannical thing that's happening to us right now. And we greatly appreciate you lending your time and lending your ears to us and giving us the opportunity to give our argument about what's happening to our children, what's going to be happening to our community. And we thank you very much for attending today. And I just want to pass this on to our lead counsel, Kevin Barry, because I think it's important. We have a long list of panelists and people that have so much to say about what's happening in our country. And I think that what you're going to hear today is going to change minds and open up your hearts and give you the opportunity to start fighting back. And I thank you again. And I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Barry, our lead counsel, and he can explain to you what the lawsuit, the principle of the lawsuit, and why we're doing it from this perspective. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you, Urban Global Health Alliance, for taking on this very important issue. And for the press, to simplify, our position is we should be opening the schools in New Jersey in 2020, just like you did in September 2019. That the situation has not changed and the new regulations are not justified. So from a legal perspective, this is a police power case. And in a police power case, the burden is on the state to prove the necessity of the restrictions on liberty. And what you're going to find after me is a panels of world-renowned experts who have views that have not been taken into account by the education departments. And another way to look at it is we think New Jersey should follow the path blazed by Sweden. Sweden never closed their schools, and they did not put these kinds of restrictions on young children, and they have had a very successful outcome. So what we're going to be asking for in New Jersey is an evidentiary hearing. We're going to be asking the judge we'll bring our experts and our evidence, and we'll be happy to have them be subject to cross-examination. And we're going to ask the state to do the same thing. We need the State Department of Health to come down. We need any of the experts that they're relying on. We need to see their data. We need to see their science, because we do not believe that the science justifies the liberty restrictions that they're putting on right now. It is not controversial that the case fatality rate for children is as close to zero as you can be without being zero. It's virtually zero. So if children are not at risk for disease and death from COVID, why is this burden falling on children? One thing I would like to read to you very briefly. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine in February. It's an article written by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield from the CDC, where they say, if one assumes that the number of asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic cases is several times as high as the number of reported cases, the case fatality rate may be considerably less than 1%. This suggests that the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 may be ultimately more akin to those of a severe seasonal influenza, which has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%. And now the data is in, and the experts will tell you in a moment, the data is in, and it is lower than 0.1%. It's lower than that. So we look forward to our day in court. We look forward to bringing our evidence. We look forward to these wonderful experts coming behind me to be cross-examined, and we look forward to cross-examining their experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to now introduce a man who's a world-renowned expert epidemiologist. Many of you have probably already heard from him, and I'm excited and honored to have him join us today in this battle against insanity. Dr. Witkowski.
Thank you very much for having me. I think we're facing two epidemics here. One is the epidemic of a virus, and one is an epidemic of fear. And right now, it seems like the epidemic of fear is killing many more people than the epidemic of the virus. And I hope that we will be able to reduce fear a bit and introduce a bit more of rational strategies. And one of the strategies is to assess in a more rational way, what are the risks of children, what are the risks of teachers, and how has the situation evolved in countries like Sweden, or also like Germany, and many other countries where schools have never been closed or have been reopened, and what are the experiences there?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, next, we'd love to hear from Dr. Charles Pennick, who's coming to us live from Oregon. Dr. Pennick.
Hi, how are you all doing? I thought I'd just chime in and share a couple of things to challenge kind of the mainstream thought, although these challenges that I'm using to support this come from mainstream people. It's just not reported in mainstream media. And so first point I wanted to make was the fact that we have really low to no evidence of the fact that mask wearing at all does anything to prevent transmission. So if we're requiring children who, according to the World Health Organization, or really anyone that's asymptomatic, there's really no evidence to support that they're even able to transmit any sort of virus if they're not sneezing, coughing, feverish, whatever it is that would be a vector for transmission. And this is based on the World Health Organization's own statements. So here we are requiring a asymptomatic child to potentially put themselves in a situation where all of the evidence that we have so far actually supports the opposite. So that sounds maybe pretty crazy to some people, because you say, well, I heard this on the news, or I heard that such and such, said this. So let me just hit this really quick. I think it's better if I read it. Basically, CDC in two different articles has stated that there is no increase or no reduction, I should say, found in biotransmission from the wearing of masks, face masks. This is from an article that the CDC put out where they cross-examined studies done from various countries around the world where they use some form of face coverings. And this article, I'll provide all the links for these, but this article was done in May, and then in June 28th, on June 28th, they also stated that homemade masks are not considered PPE. And then say we'll use surgical masks instead. Surgical masks are on the box themselves. They actually will state that they do not provide protection against the COVID vaccine. So they will say that themselves. And so then people have come out and said, well, then maybe it'll protect someone else from being receiving this transmission. But one of the interesting things is that we have no evidence that someone, first of all, asymptomatic, as I mentioned already, can transmit. But it just think logically, and that's one of the things that we have to do. Dr. Witkowski was just saying that we have also an epidemic of fear. And so we're losing logic very quickly. And so if we think that it doesn't protect the person who's wearing it, how does it protect someone else? Because if the virus can go one way, it can go the other way as well. So we just need to think about these things. So someone will say, okay, well then you gotta wear an N95 mask. Okay, N95 mask, 0.3 microns is the size. That's a very, very, very small pore, but the virus itself is 0.125 microns. So it's actually a third of the size of the pore on the N95 mask. So even wearing an N95 mask, the viral particles can transmit. So there's really no way kind of around this argument. So let me just state a couple of other things. So OSHA states that both cloths and surgical masks will not protect the wearer. against airborne transmissible infectious agents due to loose fit and lack of seal for adequate filtration. That's not even taking into account pore size. FDA, another authority here, states that masks are loose fitting and may not provide full protection from breathing airborne pathogens such as viruses. Let's see, I'm trying to skip through hit the most important points there. Not for surgical use and not considered to be personal protective equipment. The U.S. Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, states masks are not effective in preventing the general public from catching the coronavirus. Dr. Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization states, there is no specific evidence to suggest that the wearing of masks by mass population has any potential benefit. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest the opposite in the misuse of wearing a mask properly or fitting it properly. The New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very kind of an authority among physicians as far as providing evidence-based medicine, states, we know that mask wearing outside of healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection. Just a few things there that just to trigger the thought is that why are we constantly seeing this mandate when there's really no true evidence to support any of the studies that have been done really have had poor design, and you will only see a one-sided approach to this thought. Okay, and then there's the evidence of risk or harm. So we know there's a decrease in oxygenation. We know there's an increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood. These things can cause fatigue, brain fog. Your cells just aren't getting the amount of oxygen that they need. And then we may have the potential of trapped viruses for people who are wearing these. Not really a concern so much for kids because again, they're not walking around as a virus factory. But if someone were as an adult, it could actually increase the risk for having a more adverse event. And some of these masks actually contain toxic materials. So that's another thing we don't think about. What are they containing? Do they have sort of flame retardant in them? Or do they have fibers that are not beneficial for the body, depending on what the makeup is? And so no studies have been done around that. And then the last point I want to just drop really quickly is the psychological component. So if we're forcing kids, even if we take masks out of it, just not to be able to go to school and have this social interaction. I see my own son, and he lives at home. He's always been at home. He's very young, but he's walking around with this sort of sadness. My wife and I were talking about it last night. It's like, well, it's because all these kids are running away from him when he goes up to give his buddy a hug. He's like, oh, no, I got it. He takes off. And so I found my son one time in the garage crying, and he couldn't understand at 4 years old what is going on. Why are all these kids running away from me? And so think about this psychological impact of not being able to touch or interact or even see each other's faces, and how much brain development comes from us being able to read each other's emotions through the face that completely would be blocked out. So there's long-term effects that we don't really understand. And so just all of a sudden throw a unsupported by science and evidence mandate that could affect a whole entire future generation, I think is huge. So just food for thought.
Thank you, Dr. Pennick. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Mark McDonald.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mark McDonald. I'm a practicing child and adolescent psychiatrist in West Los Angeles. I am here today to let everyone know that, as Dr. Rakowski said, we are in a pandemic, and it is a very serious one, but it's not a medical pandemic. When it comes to children, this is a pandemic of fear. Fear is what is driving the closure of the schools, which in my opinion was the biggest mistake that we made in the government response to this Chinese flu virus. We should have closed the nursing homes and we should have kept the schools open. We did the opposite. And now here we are facing a whole new year of school with children stuck at home, suicide rates going up. According to the CDC director, suicide has now exceeded as cause of death for children death from coronavirus. More suicides than coronavirus deaths. That's where we are now. Kids are wetting their beds. They're fighting with their peers at home with knives, as two did in my practice last month. They're grabbing onto the pant legs of their parents saying, Daddy, Daddy, we can't go to the beach. Why? Because there are other people at the beach, Daddy. That's what one of my 8-year-olds said to his father last week. They're not playing. They're not getting their immune systems challenged. They're not learning how to gauge and experience and process facial recognition of emotions, feelings. They're losing out on an entire year of their social, their emotional, their psychological, and their physical development. It is, in my opinion, nothing less than child abuse. It has to stop. There is no medical reason for us to be concerned about sending children back to school. This debate is so absurd. I'm even wondering why we're even talking about this right now. A German study came out 2 weeks ago in the state of Saxony that studied 2,000 children and teachers using antibody testing. The findings were so stark that children don't transmit this disease, that in fact, as the study's director said when it was published a couple of weeks ago, children, not only do they not transmit the virus, they actually act as an obstacle to the transmission of the virus. In other words, being at school is actually safer for teachers than being at home with their own family. Being around children appears to confer protection to adults for transmission and infection of this virus. Protection. The study's conclusions were so surprising that the entire state of Saxony removed the mask mandate the day the study was published. What's more, there isn't a single documented case of transmission of this virus from children to adults anywhere in the world. Not a single documented case. So why are we sitting here talking about this? Why is this an argument when 186 children have already died this year of influenza, according to the CDC's own website? I checked it this morning. Why are we sitting here worrying about deaths from children that are a small fraction of that, 30, 40 children in the entire country of coronavirus? We never closed schools for influenza. We never masked children. We never social distance. We never did minute by minute testing and hand washing. Why are we doing this now? We're doing it because everybody's scared. Parents are scared. Teachers are scared. We're doing it out of fear. But there is no reason for us to be afraid of sending children back to school. The real fear should be in keeping them at home and consigning these children, these little ones that are under our protection as adults and as parents, to an entire generation of stunted development and living in their parents' basement. That is neglect. That is a failure. We need to reopen the schools in September, just like we did last September. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. Now we'll hear from Dr. Andrea.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Nazarenko. I am a community psychologist, which means I do research in the area of contextual effects or environmental influences on human development or child development, as well as bridging the gap between research and practice, or in this case, bridging the gap between what we do in practice and making sure that there's actually evidence behind those things. One of the concerns that I have as we look at mask wearing in schools and the reopening plan of schools is simply the fact that there are so many unknowns. We are being a bit myopic in our outcomes. We are looking and making decisions based solely on the transmission of risk, of COVID risk. We are looking solely at how our decisions impact the transmission of this virus. But we are forgetting that there is so much more to human development and the implications of our decisions on the whole child. Most importantly, as some of my colleagues have said earlier, the ability to teach emotional regulation and social emotional development. One of the earliest developmental milestones that we see with children is something called social smiling. If you're a parent, you know what I mean. That time you have this little itty bitty infant, right? And first of all, think about how you interact with your itty bitty infants. You look at them and you smile and you use sing-songy voices and you over exaggerate your speech, because we teach children attachment and we attach to our children. We teach children social interactions through our facial recognition. And that moment your baby smiled at you, I want you to think back if you're a parent. That moment your baby smiled back at you, you increased your attachment, because we are hardwired. Our neural connections are hardwired to recognize other people's emotions through facial expression. Our facial expression dictates when another person is happy, sad, mad, frustrated, angry. You could go the gamut of all of the emotions. And it's not just the ability to recognize how another person feels, but in order to dictate our own behavior, in order to be able to use what we call executive functioning, to problem solve, to control our own behavior, to teach children self-control of their behavior, they need to be able to understand how their behavior impacts other people. And when we hide a major part of our face, the major part that dictates how we feel, we are asking children to do all of that processing through the eyes. We do not know how our brains will rewire in order to do this, because we know thus far that our facial recognition is how, our facial expression is how we recognize someone's emotions. So when we hide that and we're making kids do this through their eyes, we don't know the impacts of that. And now you add a different layer onto that and say, how many children out there these days struggle with eye contact alone? And now we're in a classroom with children, some of which have trouble with eye contact, some of which can make eye contact, but are in a novel situation where they need to understand somebody else's emotion based on their eyes. And we're asking them to learn. We're asking them to achieve what we called a couple years ago, when it was the hot topic, 21st century skills like collaboration and communication. We're asking them to work together to be globally competitive, and the very basic functionality of understanding another person's emotion, which everything else is predicated on, is the challenge. And perhaps the most striking part of this is that we are implementing this policy without evidence that it does anything or that it even works, not only in relation to the spread of the virus, as my colleagues have talked about, but also what are the impacts on social emotional learning. We are currently spending billions of dollars nationwide on developing programs and curriculum that help with social emotional learning. And then we are going to take something and take the basis of social emotional learning, facial recognition of emotion, and make it a wide-standing policy. I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to have my child be the lab rat in a classroom. We know that we should be using evidence-informed, if not evidence-based policy making. And this is one example of implementing a policy with no evidence behind it, and certainly no substantial evidence behind it, not only on the transmission of risk of COVID, but on the overall development of the child. I care about the safety of our children. And the safety of our children is much more than this virus. The safety of our children includes how they're able to regulate their emotions in complex social interactions. It has to do with making sure our children are in school so that breakfast and lunch are fed to them. It has to do with the fact that many children are facing child abuse or domestic violence at home. Parents who have lost jobs and are struggling to stay afloat, parents who are dealing with mental illness themselves. We are simultaneously doing things to, like, stigma-free in the state of New Jersey, where we want to make mental illness have no stigma. And yet we are doing something that when children have a mental illness and can't wear a mask, they are automatically they stand out from their peers because they can't wear a mask. We are not being consistent with our values of what it means to raise happy, healthy children. And we are doing we are doing non-evidence informed policymaking. And we have many examples in our history where we've implemented programs that sound like a good idea within schools, but not only don't get to outcomes, but actually have harmful outcomes. And so we really need to go back to the drawing board and think about what are our goals here? What are our goals for our youth? And what are evidence informed policies that support that? Because this one at this point in time is simply not evidence informed.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Tammy Clark. Tammy, would you also explain to people what it is you do and your qualifications? That would be helpful for the audience that may not understand it fully.
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. So I work in the field of occupational safety and health. I'm an OSHA environmental health and safety specialist. I have been working in the fields of health, safety, regulatory compliance for over 15 years. I have taught in the classroom at the university level. I work with national clients all over the United States, from very, very large firms down to smaller individual companies on the local level or my city scale level. So basically what I do for a living is work with organizations to, number one, make sure that their employees are safe. We look at the exposures to chemicals, exposures to pathogens in their environment, exposures to environmental toxins, or it may simply be heat, saws, presses, whatever. It depends on really the risk it's a risk analysis and then a risk solution type of work. So I work with lots of different types of industries, from construction to manufacturing, even to medical healthcare facilities and systems. Coming in and taking a look at what does the individual organization's health, safety, and compliance program look like? Is it effective? Is it keeping people safe? I review their records to see, are we having trends in any particular direction that we need to focus on? For example, are people getting a lot of lacerations or cuts, or do we have a lot of exposure to chemical gases or things like that, so that we know where to focus our energies and to create strong solutions and better performance on the safety side of things, the health and safety side of things. Part of the work also involves compliance with regulatory agencies. So I look at the company's overall health and safety program. I look at the performance. Is it effective? And then we kind of roll up our sleeves and we get to work after. I typically start with a SWOT analysis with companies, looking at their internal strengths and weaknesses and their external opportunities and threats and things like that. And then once we've identified where they're weak and where they're strong, then we can get to work building on their health and safety program and looking at how compliant they are with government regulatory agencies like OSHA, EPA, DOT, things like that. There's a lot of regulatory agencies involved in the workplace occupational safety and health field, making sure that employees are basically healthy and safe at work. So when the whole mask conversation started coming up, that was a real red flag to me. And it was something that other environmental health and safety professionals started chatting about behind the scenes, because this is not healthy for people. We were not designed to breathe with our mouths and noses covered. And so I started doing some videos on this and some trainings on this, probably, I would say, 6 weeks ago or so. And some of those things have gone viral. And I've since had an opportunity to address some of the questions from people coming back to me saying, well, what about this? What about this? People trying to discredit me because what I'm saying does not fit the narrative that is being pushed. We're all being told to mask up. I'm in a state that I live in Michigan, and I'm in a state that is, our governor is particularly tyrannical and really ruling the state unilaterally, not working with the legislator, overruling them, overriding them. And so it's very much a dictator type of situation. And my concerns for the mandates that she's dropping are the kids, really. I'm concerned also, obviously, because I work with employees in the workplace situation. I'm very concerned for the adverse health effects that I'm seeing with employees. And this is why OSHA actually has respirator standards. OSHA has PPE standards. And when it comes to kids, just because I know basically what happens in the workplace when you violate these things. And I see the adverse health effects. I deal with the workplace illnesses and injuries all the time in my line of work. I know what is coming for our kids, and I'm very, very concerned. I'm a mom myself. I'm a new grandma, so I have a new grandbaby. And so this really kind of sparked me to get involved, to take some action, and to start speaking up, because we are not hearing from any PPE experts, not one. We are basically hearing from 2 doctors, and they have been wrong on everything. Their models and their predictions have been wildly wrong. And the things that they're wanting us to do now, even wear a mask inside of your home. We're hearing things that are, I know from my field, from my expertise, what I've been doing for many, many years, they're going to create very dangerous, very unhealthy situations and illnesses and long-term illnesses and injuries. In fact, we're already seeing some of those things. We're seeing pleurisy being diagnosed more and more. We're seeing maskne, what we call maskne. It's an actual type of dermatitis that is showing up on the skin. It looks like bumps and pimples and red spots on the face from the increased moisture exposure with a bacteria buildup. And it's actually creating some infections and rashes. Dentists are now seeing what they call mask mouth, an increase of bacteria in the mouth causing really stinky breath, and bacteria buildup and increased cavities and things like that. So that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what we see with reduced oxygen levels. And I, as an OSHA credentialed safety and health professional, I have been very concerned with what OSHA is doing with this. This very agency that was created in 1970 to protect workers, to keep people safe on the job. One of their stated goals, their mission, is to protect the American worker from workplace health and safety issues, to keep America's workers healthy on the job. Now, what they are doing is they're actually becoming an agency that is enforcing something that is creating employees to get sick. I'm hearing from people all over this country, and to be honest with you, all over the world. I've got people from Australia reaching out to me, England, Canada, just everywhere, saying, you know, we can't breathe. I'm getting headaches. I'm getting migraines. I'm getting nauseated. I'm getting lightheaded. I cannot work in this mask. And there's a reason for that. We were not designed to breathe with restricted oxygen intake or reduced carbon dioxide expirations or output. And so we are creating some very serious issues. And like I said, this is why OSHA created the respirator standard in the first place. And we all hear the term PPE thrown around a lot, but people in my field understand that this term has been used incorrectly. PPE stands for personal protective equipment. A homemade face mask or a surgical mask was not designed to be PPE. It is not personal protective equipment. In fact, in the workplace, employees cannot even bring in their own masks. In order to wear a mask, you must be medically evaluated. There is a long questionnaire and a medical evaluation that you have to go through just in order to be able to wear even an N95. Then you have to be fit tested. You have to make sure that the fit and the seal is proper. You have to be clean shaven if you're a man. Now we're taking people, and in the beginning of this, I was watching these N95s be handed out like candy, and OSHA would cite my clients for putting their people in N95s if they didn't go through the respirator program, if they didn't follow OSHA's respirator standard. Now we're passing these things out like crazy. And OSHA's turned a blind eye to this. And I'm thinking, and those in my field are thinking, what is going on here? This is incredibly dangerous. OSHA has taken a complete 180, but they are being weaponized against our businesses. Instead of being there to protect workers, now they're the very ones enforcing something that is creating a very unhealthy workplace and a working condition for employees. And employees have nowhere to turn. So this is really, really a dangerous precedent that we have set here. And I have been saying from the beginning, we are going to start seeing some very serious outcomes from this, because this is not healthy. This is not normal. And we've already begun to see some of those things happening. I've talked to a lot of people who have developed long-term industrial type bronchitis and respiratory issues from wearing even masks with the N95 and the N100s, even with a proper fit. When people work long-term in these masks, they do develop issues a lot of times. And so now we don't know what's going to happen. We're just telling everybody, even 2-year-olds in my state, 2-year-olds, that's a baby in diapers with a pacifier still. And babies are supposed to sleep on their backs. with no blankets and no toys in the crib because we don't want them to suffocate. Now we are intentionally suffocating them. We are smothering them with these masks. We're going to see strangulations. We're going to see choking issues, and the nasal, I mean, the doctors, there's been an incredible panel of doctors that I really enjoyed listening to, but they can attest to that. The nasal passages and these little ones are very tiny. And then we're going to restrict the airflow even more. I mean, we're going to see the SIDS and the strangulation and all of these things continue, because this is just incredibly dangerous, and it's insane what we are doing. So I got involved out of my concern as a PPE expert, understanding that what we have done is we have made homemade face masks, we have made dust masks, nuisance masks, actual PPE. Now we're telling people this is your personal protective equipment. And so we need to be following the PPE standards then. And yet where is OSHA on this? We're not. We've just thrown all these OSHA standards to the wind. And OSHA's coming back and they're trying to defend themselves. They're trying to say, they even came out and said, a face mask is not PPE. Yes, but when you mandate it in the workplace, you just now made it PPE. So how you can't have it both ways. So there's just so much to the depth of this. And there are a lot of things that, you know, people have come out against me and tried to debunk the things that I've said. And there are a lot of things I could get into in depth with that. You know, for example, why can hospital workers work in masks all day long? I will have nurses and hospital workers stand up and say, we can work in a mask all day long, so it's not a problem. That's not true, the things that you're saying. But what they don't understand is that it's people like me who come in and we actually work on the contractor side of things and the testing side of things, that those ASHRAE the standards and the engineering standards that are based on OSHA's requirements are the design elements that goes into the HVAC and mechanical systems in hospitals and in medical facilities. The doctors and nurses don't understand that. There is increased airflow cycles that are happening in all surgical centers, in hospitals and medical facilities, because it's a very carefully controlled microenvironment. And that's for infectious disease control, basically. So those environments are cooler. The humidity levels are kept at a certain temperature and a certain humidity level. The microenvironment is carefully monitored. And so with those increased air cycle exchanges, there is an increased airflow and there's more oxygen in those rooms and it's cooler. And so they are able to work in those surgical masks for long periods of time with no issues. It's not the same thing as a cook standing over, you know, a hot stove or hot grease, or a construction worker working in 90-degree temperature with high humidities. We are seeing that the side effects of that and the health effects of that right now, because that is not the way it should be done. And my concern is that we need to have some accountability here for actually creating very unhealthy, very unsafe, very dangerous workplace conditions by just mandating that everybody blanket has to work in a mask, without medically evaluating them, without doing fit tests, without even knowing if these people are medically fit enough to be able to tolerate a face mask. So that's where I'm coming at this from a very high level of concern, especially with our children.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony today. Before we turn it over to press, Dr. Wachowski, I would like to hear from you. I know that there's some concerns that you'd like to address yourself and some other studies.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. Because I don't see me on the screen here right now. So the concern that I have is we always believe that wearing masks is good, that it reduces death. And in fact, it is not. All those mitigation, whether it's distancing, whether it's wearing a mask, whatever it is, it just delays infection and death. It's not preventing them. The only thing that prevents death is when we have herd immunity, and to simplify things, 50% of all people have to immune, and at that point, the virus stops spreading. Whenever we wear masks or do anything that just prolongs the time until we reach that point, and it redirects the virus. So if the children and the healthy adults wear masks, the virus will spread more among the elderly and those who are vulnerable. So wearing masks in situations like in the school or in business, on the street, in normal social interactions, if it should work, which we don't really know, but let's presume it works, then it actually increases the number of deaths in the society. It is the opposite of what we want to do, and therefore it's counterproductive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now we'd like to open it up for some question and answers. And the first one that came in, I would ask Kevin Barry to answer, which was from Allison. What can I do as a parent in New Jersey to refuse that my children wear masks in schools all day, even while at social distance desks? Aside from a medical exemption, how can I challenge or refuse that legally? I don't want my kids 100% virtual learning, but there's no safety demonstrations for our masks on children that would support this mandate is safe.
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but right now I'll put in the chat a link to the most recent statement from the New Jersey Education Department, where they list a whole list of exceptions to requiring masks. So it's required unless doing so would inhibit the student's health. The student is in extreme heat outdoors. The student is in water. I don't know where that one came from. The student's documented medical condition or disability as reflected in an IEP precludes face covering. The student is under age 2 during the period when the student is eating or drinking. And it goes on. It lists this eight or 10 exceptions. So what we'll be asking the judge to do is to invalidate these regulations so that the masks are not required at all. But if we don't get that, then you'd have to see if your child fit into one of the exceptions to the requirement. And I'll post it in the comments.
Great, thank you. The next question we had was, how are we going to fight this in court? Again, this is a Kevin Barry question. Are you taking this information to the state and to the NJEA to get schools open? What's going to happen next to get help for our children?
Yeah, we're taking it to the state court. We'll likely be filing next week. We'll be assembling the expert affidavits from this group. We have a few dozen already. And the next step will be getting in front of a state judge and asking for an evidentiary hearing for the state to justify what they're doing. The burden of proof is on the state. So let them bring their proof, we'll bring our proof, and let's see what the judge thinks.
Thank you. Another question that came in was, on a macro level, racial tensions. If we want to build community and connection, what does this policy look like? I would kick this over to Dr. Andrea or Mark McDonald, or both, actually.
Yeah, so this is an issue that I'm particularly concerned with, and it's the notion that we don't live in a silo. COVID is not something that's just this separate thing from everything else that's going on in the world, and we're living in a time where we need more than anything to teach our kids to be connected with each other. We need human connectedness. And we see the opposite of that. We're seeing a lot of hate. We're seeing racial tensions. We're seeing an explosion of the type of hate that we just don't want anymore, or at least I believe most people don't want anymore. And so there's just this inconsistency, for lack of better words, between saying we want to make a more equal society, we want to end racial tensions, we want to be socially connected, we want to teach children that culture matters, we want to teach children to befriend people who are different from them, and then we give them a mask and say, if somebody else is not wearing a mask, they're a danger to you. We are implicitly and explicitly teaching children to fear other people. And the basis of hate is fear, right? When you fear another person, when you fear somebody who's not like you, whether that's by skin color, by ethnicity, by language, or by disease status, when you fear the other person who's different from you, it sets the condition where hate can develop. And if we want to be serious about about moving forward in this country and taking steps to end not only racial tensions, but tensions all across the board, and really developing this oneness and this connectedness with our nation, then we need to focus on connectivity and not more separation.
This is Dr. Mark McDonald. I really think what Dr. Nazarenko just said is critically important. And I would only add one thing to it because of my experience in my practice, which is that the prevalence of social media and screen time, which has already been a huge problem for children's emotional and social development, that problem has now exploded as children have been confined to home and have been forced to do online learning. And it's just as she said, when you have online learning, you don't actually meet people face to face and you don't have that human experience. And the absence of human experience, meaning in person, face to face, no mask, no distancing, none of this nonsense, you wind up creating prejudices, biases, and bullying. And that actually leads to further division by differences, not just race, but also sex, interest, age, background, religion. All of that goes away when you actually sit down and spend time with people, almost always, particularly with children, because children are not inherently biased against other people. They love difference. They love experiencing new things with new people. That's what they're there for. They're like sponges. But when you take the sponge and you put it in a basement, it desiccates and it stops accepting information and experience. So keeping kids at home is actually doing the opposite of growth, development, and nurturing the removal of differences and biases and prejudices, in my opinion, in my experience.
And,
Thank you.
Could I add one thing as well to that, just to pick up on what Dr. McDonald just said, is that type of bullying, that type of cyberbullying that we potentially may run into with more social media and more kids in front of using social media and kids in front of the computer is a type of bullying that as adults, we don't know, because we didn't grow up in a world where that type of bullying existed. And so it is harder to be proactive and ahead of the game. Can we do it? Yeah, I believe that we have great minds in this country that could come up with it. But gosh, wouldn't it be easier to just avoid all of that in the first place and prevent it by putting kids face to face and getting kids with differences together before those biases exist? Before we teach them to hate, can we teach them to love and teach them to connect with other people?
Great point. Thank you. Dr. Wachowski, we have another question for you. How the Imperial College estimate by Ferguson that 2.2 million Americans would die, which is the justification for shutting down the US, could be so wrong, and where does that lead us now?
Well, there were actually two groups in Britain. So the British government tried to do the right thing. They had the Imperial College and they had Oxford with Sunetra Gupta. And they had two very different models. Sunetra Gupta said, well, probably we already have a substantial proportion of people who are immune, and therefore it won't be as bad, and her estimates turned out to be right. On the other hand, there was Neil Ferguson, and he took an approach to make all assumptions as bad as possible, but then he was very persuasive in talking to the government, probably more so persuasive than Sunetra Gupta was. And as a result, the government followed his estimate that was totally off. It was like with all models, if the assumptions that you make are wrong, all your predictions are wrong. And his assumptions were wrong, and therefore his predictions were wrong.
Thank you. We have one for Dr. Pennick, I would believe, or any of the doctors, but Dr. Pennick, I'm wondering, would you be able to answer a question regarding children in your practice, how many you're seeing that come in from COVID and the diagnosing and testing?
Sure. So I'm not a pediatrician, family medicine doc. So I do see adults and kids, but I would say probably since the first confirmed cases in the US of COVID happening, I've probably seen somewhere between 200 and 300 kids. And I personally have yet to have seen a kid with COVID-19. Different practitioners may have a different scenario. That's just my own personal experience. So with that number of kids between the states that I practice in, I think that does show for something that's considered to be extremely infectious to have that many kids and not one of them. I think it shows something.
Thank you. One more. How much pressure do professors face to conform to the National Institute of Health's views? Can professors with degrees with the NIH disagree with the NIH and the WHO narrative and still receive funding? I think we have one doctor on here that wants to take that question. Go ahead, Dr. Witowski.
So I think when I started my career in science, you became a professor, you were funded, and you wouldn't have to think about money anymore. It's not the same today. When you are a professor today, you get a desk and internet access, and you have to raise money for your salary and for the people that are working with you. And much of that money comes from the NIH. So would you want to beat the hand that's feed you? Probably not. And so most people who are in science in this field depend on money from the NIH, and they're very careful not to raise the suspicion that they might disagree with the NIH. And that is why most of the people who disagree are those who are retired and do not depend on funding from the NIH anymore.
Thank you. As we close out this section of Q&A, I'd like to ask any of our panelists if you have any further thoughts you'd like to close on before we bring over our parents, our educators that have their own testimonies to share. I want to make sure that we hear from our panelists prior to bringing them in. If there's no other comments or concerns or areas that you wanted to make sure were highlighted, I will then ask Alexandra to come on.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for having me on, and all of the panelists, the doctors, the experts. You guys are amazing, and thank you for all that you're doing. I'm a mom to twin 8-year-old nonverbal boys with autism who require very special services, and we have decided to pull our boys from school because we refuse to allow our children with these already severe special needs to be experimented on, and we reject the new normal. And when I say that we decided to pull our kids from school, I mean we have no choice but to pull our boys from school in order to protect them from being experimented on. And just like all of these panelists have shared, is that we don't know what this new normal will do to our children. And we don't know what the consequences of masking and social distancing will create for our kids. I had to refuse a job after graduating this May. During the pandemic, I was in an internship and I was offered a job, and I am unable to have a career now because I will be staying home with my kids because I have to protect them, and I must protect them. And I'm going to protect them with all I have. And I think that for all the parents who are thinking about this, I feel like I have no choice. So we are now, my husband has been working so hard to go and drill desks into the wall because my kids knock over furniture, and I have been working tirelessly to schedule ourselves homeschooling, and setting up days. My mom, thank goodness, is going to be able to come and help me so that I can work one-on-one with a child, and we plan to do the best we can to protect them. But until the rest of the world starts to wake up and see that this new normal is not normal and it's not evidence-based, and there are so many questions that we have and so many concerns, I don't think that things are going to get better until everyone starts to stand up and realize that we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what we're getting into. And this is a really important matter, and that's why I'm getting involved. I've been involved in many activism, but we can't do this to our kids. We just can't. So thank you so much, Susan. And I know there's so many other panelists who understand what we're going through, and the other parents who will be going through this as well.
Thank you, Alexandra, for coming in. I'd like to then bring on a teacher who's out of New Jersey that will remain anonymous as a plaintiff on the case. Jane Doe.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I have been a New Jersey public school teacher for over 10 years, and I'm also an NJEA member. Let me start by being clear that my words and opinions are my own, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the NJEA or my employer. I find myself in quite the predicament. I love being a teacher and working with children, seeing the excitement on their face when they learn something new. I love going to work every day knowing that I can make a difference in the life of a child. And for the first time in my life and my career, I am afraid to return to work. Let me be clear. I'm not afraid of COVID-19. As someone who is unable to wear a mask, and I'm uncertain and afraid of how my presence will be received in school, and I am concerned with the long-term effects of the mask mandates for our children. I want to return to school, and I'm not afraid because of the virus. I'm afraid because of the fear-mongering that has taken place all over the state, as well as the country. With that being said, I am apprehensive of the environment our children will return to if and when they return to school. I struggle to envision schools where everyone is masked, including the children, where children are taught that they can't socialize or share, where hugs are now forbidden, where they learn through their teachers to be fearful, schools where teachers become mask and social distance police. This is not how a child's education should be, and I want no part of this. Not for myself, my students, and not for my own children who desperately want to go back to school. We have allowed the fear-mongering, not only by the media, but also by the NJEA, to create this evolution of what schools should be, and I'm horrified by it. The NJEA Executive Committee is calling on all 200,000 teachers to join them in what they call educating the community that it's not safe to open schools. They have asked us to spread their fear. I feel it's become the duty of all of us to stand up now and not allow the educational system to be forever corrupted by this fear. Schools should be a safe haven for children, not a fear-mongering institution, especially since the science is showing that children are not vectors for the virus. Teachers, who I am embarrassed to say are teachers, have already expressed on social media how they will handle their students. I am giving my testimony today as an advocate because I'm horrified by some of their statements. On a rank and file NJEA member Facebook page, teachers are advocating that students should be forced to distance learn if they're not capable of wearing a mask, regardless of their medical conditions or disabilities. Some have chosen to take it so far as to suggest that children who can't wear masks should have preferential seating away from their peers in locations such as the hallway or the bathroom. Yes, you heard that correctly. They suggested that children should be put in the bathroom if they can't wear a mask. I have seen teachers express that they plan to ostracize students who are not capable of wearing a mask in school. Other teachers have posted comments such as one cough and they're out in reference to their students. Teachers posting sample eulogy type letters that their administrators can use upon the death of a teacher for having to return to work. Is this really what my profession has become? Lately, everyone is pushing for police reform. Seeing fellow educators speak this way makes me feel like we need some teacher reform and sensitivity training. Educators should not be perpetuating this fear. I have always spent my career as an advocate for my students. Now more than ever, I feel the need to stand up because the children have no voice here. And this absolutely not be the model for education moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane Doe, for your testimony. I'd like to now bring in another mother, a New Jersey resident, Stephanie Maharis.
Hello?
You're good.
Hello?
Continue, Stephanie. We can hear you.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Stephanie Maharis, and I am here as a mom of two children who are both in the New Jersey school system who have severe IEPs. And I am here to say that neither of my children can be masked. My daughter's eyes do not track, and anything on her face will make her eyes not able to track. So my children are being ostracized from going to school, even though they have medical conditions that really need the attention of teachers. And I just want to thank the educators who have given my children the schooling since they're in kindergarten and elementary. What they have done for my children has been world class. They have come to their aid. They have taught them facial recognition. They have hugged them when they were down. They did OT, PT, speech, brushing, trampolines. The educators in our state are fully capable of giving the care our children need, and they do not need to be afraid of these children. I know that as a parent, it's very scary to hear the word virus. I know that it is, hold on, can I hold for 1 second? I'm sorry, I'm at my office. I just want to say that oxygen has been a critical element in the healing of my son, who was diagnosed with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. He was a 1-to-1 aid condition in the state of New Jersey from 1st grade to 6th grade. But the work of the teachers that was done brought my son back to life. And hyperbaric oxygen therapy, vitamin C therapy, many therapies were used on my son to bring him back to a place where he was able to be in a classroom and was thriving. Right now, both my children who cannot learn on the screen properly, obviously, if you have a child who cannot track, they can't track the screen when the teacher's moving, are unable to learn. So it has been so difficult, but I am encouraging my children to not live in fear. I have never masked them. They are both immunocompromised, and I am not afraid. I go through the day with a smile on my face, greeting people and looking at people because I know this to be true. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness which were given to us, are our inalienable rights, were given to us, and the opposite of those things are what we are facing right now. Instead of life, we are constantly talking about death. Instead of liberty, we are talking about slavery, both of our bodies, our movement, our actual oxygen, our breath of life, the life-sustaining gas on this planet. And instead of pursuing happiness, we're watching our children fall into depression. If you are an educator, if you are in OT, PT, or in Gillingham, whatever you're in, these children need you, and they are not a risk to you. In fact, so many children were coming to play in my backyard, which is not closed and very near a park in New Jersey. The police wanted to set up a little barricade around it. I said, these kids are out here playing, getting fresh oxygen. They're hanging out. I'm not going to stop them from coming onto my property. And the reason why is these children have been together. To separate them from one another is to separate the vital, sustaining love and connection that they need. And my son, who couldn't look at faces and couldn't read emotions, now can do those things. And he says, Mom, I don't even know what people are saying when they have a mask on. So I don't want that regression to happen inside of him. I see my children asking, what did they say? And I'm realizing that my children are not able to even understand what other people are saying while they are masked. So to me, that is a huge issue. My children will not be able to be educated, and that will fall on me. But I'm so concerned for the single moms. I myself was a single mother, and I don't know how the single parents in the state of New Jersey are going to be able to function. I am so highly concerned that they are going to be left destitute and alone, and people won't even want to go and help them because they're afraid of a virus that has a 99.98 live rate. So I am going forward urging teachers to join us in opening New Jersey's schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. I'd like to now introduce Janet White.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So my name's Janet White, and I'm a parent, and I'm a New Jersey public school teacher, and I'm a member of the Teachers Union. I have 17 years experience teaching, and I'm only speaking for myself and not on behalf of my employer or the NJEA. So there have been so many teachers coming forward in the media and on social media, and they're all saying the same things publicly. And they're saying, please don't open the schools. Let's just learn remotely. So I keep hearing of teachers, even as the prior teacher said, they're updating their wills and writing them for the first time. So I just wanted to be a teacher to come forward today and just be one voice and say, please open the schools. I saw a post over the weekend from someone whose name I didn't jot down, who wrote, people are so afraid of dying that they're scared of living. This really resonated with me. Why are so many people still afraid of the coronavirus? Why are people letting fear stop them from living their fullest lives? I'm not afraid. People argue about the percentages, but we have at least a 98% chance of survival. If we get this, life is inherently risky, and we cannot continue to live in fear. I love being a teacher, and I love working with and teaching students, and our jobs require interaction with those students. 90% of my success and my students' success is the result of my personal relationships with those students and my colleagues in the building. I don't have data to back that up, only observation and experience. Students need those personal connections with their teachers and their classmates to take those risks necessary to open their minds and to accept new information and make those connections to prior knowledge. Teachers have a responsibility to create safe learning environments where people can take those risks in them. And these environments are created in person, in school, with each other. Closing our buildings in March was devastating for everyone. We were told to stay home, flatten the curve. As the curve flattened, we were told to continue to stay home. Each week on my Zoom calls with my students, many of their once bright, eager eyes, they would just dim more and more each week. They'd stop signing in to the video calls. My 12 and 13-year-old students were growing fearful of all other people and of going outdoors. This has to stop. We cannot continue to terrify our children. Opening schools with masks and told to stay 6 feet apart from everyone is teaching our children to live in fear. Where is the data and science that this is healthy for our kids? What about children's emotional and social health, as many of the doctors earlier have spoken about? To open schools with masks, partitions, distancing, it takes away most of the personal interactions in the classroom. And though we lose facial expressions, we lose emotions, we lose smiles. Students need to be able to work with each other, to collaborate and learn from each other. How can teachers read the moods and feelings of their students if we can't see their facial expressions? Our classes are already too short for all we want to accomplish with our learning objectives. And now we're gonna not even see our kids' faces and take away those personal elements as well. These measures won't allow us to build the classroom and school communities that we all need, love, to grow, to become contributing members of society. These measures will only teach our children to stay afraid. I am one of those people that you occasionally see in stores that doesn't wear a mask. I am one of those people, if wearing a face covering, it inhibits my health. You've probably noticed someone like me and thought, well, why isn't she wearing a mask? You know, every time I go out, I'm wondering, am I going to get yelled at? Am I going to be questioned? So I walk around with the doctor's note in my purse that I have a medical condition and I can't wear one. What's going to happen in September? What's going to happen with people like me, the teachers and students who are unable to wear masks? Are we going to be allowed in the building? Are we going to be discriminated against? I hope there are some other teachers and parents who are listening who at least you agree with part of what I'm saying. I'm not afraid. And let's not teach our children to continue to be afraid like this. Look at all the available data. Most of us are not at risk of dying of coronavirus. Let's go back to protecting the vulnerable like we always have. How many times have I told my parents, you know, I'm not going to bring my son over because he's got the sniffles. I don't want you to get sick. Or my whole class practically had the flu in December and I'm not going to see my parents because they're elderly. We used to take care of each other. Let's go back to taking care of each other like we always have with common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Jessica Letty next, please.
Hi, how's it going? So I have a son that's in the New Jersey school system, and he's got an IEP, and he has sensory order and failure to thrive. And I went for his kindergarten evaluation and had emailed them saying that he was not gonna be able to wear a mask based on his sensory issues. And they said, okay. And we walked into the door and everyone's masked and he did his questions and his temperature check. And then the kindergarten teacher that he had known he's been going there since he's 3 because of his IEP and early intervention, saw him, and with her mask through her eyes, he didn't know who she was, which is really sad because he's seen her for 3 years. And then he went to give her a hug and she kind of not pushed him away, but she stepped back, and the look on his face of disappointment and sadness and the welling up of his eyes of tears was just like too much, that he couldn't get that social interaction. So they said we couldn't do our assessment there that day. We'd have to do it virtually because he wouldn't be allowed in the school without a mask. And they said, okay, but I have my note, and I emailed everyone and they said, well, it's for public safety issue. He can't come in the building. So this child has been going there since he's 3 years old and in preschool is no longer allowed in the building. So we get in the car and I start to think, if he's not even allowed in the building for an assessment, how is he going to be allowed to go there every day? So I then email my case manager and say, I have the note. I don't understand exactly what's happening. We know you've known him for X amount of years. You know that he can't even wear socks some days, let alone in clothes. So a mask is definitely far out of the spectrum. And she suggested to me that he will then be re-enrolled in specific OT to allow him to get used to wearing a mask. So now they want to do instead of just OT for writing and for core strength and for standing and stability, they want him to do occupational therapy to wear a mask, just to attend school. The other option is to do fully from home school as a kindergartner. So that aspect is absolutely ridiculous to me, considering the fact that the virus is in children, not an issue. And there is no documented cases of transmission from child to adult. So there's some kind of disconnect when it comes to figuring out where these children should be placed and forcing them to get occupational therapy to streamline them into a school system just to wear a mask. It doesn't really make much sense. They should be focusing on actual tactile skills and fine motor, as opposed to covering their faces and forcing them to develop in that aspect. So I just think that that is a disservice to myself and my son and our family and the school system in general. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, we'll hear from Primera Besman.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I am working with Urban Global Health Alliance, in addition to being a mother of 2 girls who were scheduled to go back to school this fall. One of them being 4 years old, she has been waiting for 2 years. Every morning when her older sister was going to school, she was putting on her own backpack, running out the door. I had to scoop her back up and tell her she's not old enough yet. She had to wait. Unfortunately, when the time is right for her to finally be ready to go to school, the school environment has changed completely to beyond recognition. The school reopen plan that we received from our school district has caused me to not sleep since we have received it for weeks. I have not slept a proper night's sleep. Just imagining sending our children back to this new world order situation that is not only going to steal their childhood away, but it's going to affect them so deeply psychologically for the long term that it may also steal their humanity away. This does not sit well with my conscience, imagining these children lining up like cattle to have their temperatures checked at the door by an authority figure holding a gun-like device to their foreheads while they submit to it, waiting for their own turn to be admitted if they qualify for the randomly assigned maximum temperature level that is not even consistent with a healthy or unhealthy child's regular temperature levels. The state of New Jersey has arbitrarily reduced the temperature set to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas all medical experts agree that a healthy child goes up to 100.4 degrees. So where is that discrepancy coming from? Our school district further adjusted that down to 99.5 degrees. So there's a group of children that will not even be allowed to access entry into the school because while still being healthy, they may have a slightly elevated temperature, but that level is not acceptable to the school anymore. They have to stay 6 feet apart, wearing masks all day long, not able to touch each other. Singing has been banned from the music class. This is absurd to me. Why is singing banned in music class? What are we then going to teach these 5-year-olds in music class if singing is not available anymore? The contact sports have been removed. They have to all face the same way sitting in class. They have to face one way while they're having their lunches. They can't even have lunch as a group. It is pretty much the same thing as solitary confinement, which is a form of deep punishment. And even that for inmates is restricted to certain amounts of duration. To subject our children to this every single day, day after day, until when we do not know, is just so not right. Constant hand sanitizing, constant hand washing with potentially toxic chemicals, the spraying of lots of cleaning products. We don't have the material safety data sheets to any of those. They have not been disclosed to us. This is probably going to cause other respiratory issues and put our children in greater risk of health reactions. So we're finding it very difficult to send our children to an environment like this where they won't be able to hug their friends or hug their teachers or develop those most valuable, loving relationships for a good chunk of their waking hours. And that that is a concern that we share with a lot of parents, actually. But unfortunately, some other parents are sitting in another zone where they're thinking the authorities came up with these guidelines to protect us, so they must really have the science to back it up. They must have the data to back it up. And they have outsourced that authority to the legislators, to the governor and his team, and they are trusting them. Unfortunately, those who are in power are not to be trusted because they have not done their due diligence. They don't have the science and they don't have the data. But as this plan trickles down and it comes to the school level, the school is no longer in a position to question the guidelines. They take it as a given. They take it that the due diligence has been done. Now we have to figure out how to implement it. And then once it's been released to the parents are under the impression that all the other checkpoints before them have done their due diligence, including the school district. And unfortunately, it is not accurate. So we find ourselves in this position that we're in the tail end of this process, but we have the responsibility and the accountability to go all the way to the first step. Why are we doing this in the first place? Is it the right thing to do? What are the consequences of each of these things? Are they safe or effective or harmful? And that is why we are in this together. I wanted to walk you through a quick scenario of how just sending our kids back to school with the new reopen plans doesn't just stop there. I know that a lot of my friends are thinking, oh, it's just a safety precaution. We're just gonna put the masks on, temperature checks, no big deal. But let me walk you through this scenario, how this will affect the rest of the community very quickly and suck us all in possibly very negative ways. Sending the child to school, the child may not meet the maximum temperature threshold, although technically still being in that healthy zone because of the arbitrary temperature levels that were set. That child will be asked to leave the school and go back home, potentially with other siblings. So that parent who thought they were going back to work that day will now need to cancel work, come back, pick up the children, and go back home. The protocol suggests that the children cannot be readmitted back to class unless they have a written doctor's clearance. Which doctor in New Jersey is going to feel comfortable putting in writing that your child is clear to go back to school and that your child does not have COVID without running a COVID test? So that means you have to have an in-person doctor's appointment. If you can get one that day, which is also not always possible, you're going to pay hundreds of dollars to have your children tested, which is a very intrusive process. The more children that test, the more positive results we're going to get. We know that the PCR tests are not reliable. There is false positives, and the children may not even be infected. So a positive test result does not mean you're infected, nor does it mean you're actually spreading it to anyone else. But now you have to be in 14-day quarantine along with the sibling. The moment that happens, the whole class, along with the teachers, will have to also go into 14-day quarantine. That means this is a very high likelihood that these classes in their totality will be constantly going into 14-day quarantine periods, constant interruption to the learning process, constantly sending kids and educators back to remote learning, where learning is actually not really going to happen effectively, as we know from our past experience on this. And then everybody gets pulled into the contact tracing system, which again in New Jersey is being pushed out in a non-constitutional way, non-democratic way. When it was heard in the Assembly Committee, everybody from the public testified against it. It was still pushed forward, and it keeps going through the stages. It's already been invested in. It's already happening against the people's will with taxpayer money. So the moment you're pulled into the contact tracing system, that means those parents cannot go back to work either. So because your child's classmate had a fever one day, the whole class and the parents is now staying at home. And who's going to help us out with the lost wages? What's going to be the downstream effect on the overall economy, the livelihood of all these families? So it goes way beyond a quick little, oh, just put on a mask, get your temperature. There are big issues at play, and none of them are based in science or public health. This is based in politics. That's why we invite everyone, if you are concerned, if you're outraged, please do not hide. Come join hands with us. There is a larger community than you think. If you're in fear, we invite you to connect with those who are not in fear. Let us help you come out of fear. If you want to support our cause, please come join us at urbanglobalhealthalliance.com. And if you want to support our lawsuit, please donate to urbanglobalhealthalliance.com/donate so we can do this together. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Primera. Kevin Barry, I'll open it over to you, and we're going to wrap up with our final comments with a few more of our panelists, and then say thank you to everyone's for everyone's time. Kevin, you're on mute, sir. Kevin?
You got me now?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
I'll be real fast, even faster, because I just wasted 10 seconds. Just to frame this, it's gotten so crazy with all the mask hype and the inundation over months on a daily basis in the media, that what we're asking the judge to do is preserve the status quo. We're not asking for a change, the state is. We're trying to preserve the status quo. They're trying to put on all these draconian new regulations that are not justified by the current science. That's all. I mean, it's nuts that what we're asking for is a status quo, and they're acting like we're crazy. That's it.
Thank you, Kevin. I would like to bring it then over to Dr. Andrea.
I just wanted to comment and thank all of the teachers and parents who shared their perspective. And I wanted to zoom out for a second and not only model the problem that we're facing here, but suggest that we need to start modeling the solution. And the solution here cannot fall within the realm of the teachers only. We cannot take this problem at this point and say, the teachers will figure it out in the classroom. We gave you guidance, now go. Because this is not a problem that was created within the classroom. This is a systemic problem. And every single level of our ecological system plays a role. The parents play a role for advocating for the health and well-being of our children, for speaking out, for asking their doctors for the evidence behind the suggestions that they're making, for pushing back in their school districts to say, no, this is not okay, and this is what I'm concerned about. For feeling comfortable to say those things even when they're hard and scary. The teachers do play a role to figure out how to support the social and emotional development while simultaneously teaching our children academics. That is what they're trained to do in a classroom that no longer looks like the way that they were trained to teach in. But the onus also falls on the principals and the school districts to provide support to the teachers and the parents. The onus falls on the policymakers at the county level, at the state level, and at the national level. And the onus falls on the media as the thread that ties all of that together. We cannot move forward when the dialogue and that thread is one story. Dialogue by its nature is it's multifaceted. There's multiple perspectives. And the problem we're in right now is because we followed a single model with poor assumptions, is because we allowed fear to take over our logic and our science, because we allowed a lot of different things to get in the way of our status quo. And we cannot go back in time, and we cannot. There's no point in deciding which decision points were good and which decision points were bad. All we could say is this is the point we're at now. And the solution to this problem requires input from everybody collectively, not just the teachers, not just the schools, but everybody, and tying it all together. This is a systemic problem and it needs a systemic fix.
Thank you. Tammy, I'd invite you for your final thoughts. Need you to unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I would just like to point out, I think one of the things that is really necessary, and I've heard it already, which is, it's great because I think all of this panel of experts agrees that the cure cannot be worse than the disease. Now, we know this is not a disease, it's a virus, but in essence, what we're doing is we are creating a cure to this problem that is so much worse than the disease, the original issue itself. And I think now that the numbers are coming out and we know that this particular virus is actually less dangerous to us than a normal flu, than like we had discussed previously in the beginning of all of this. Now that we know that, we need to understand and we need to keep the conversation focused on the fact that we do not strive to remove all risk in our lives. And that's what they're trying to do. And that's what these mandates and these draconian measures are doing. It's, that we've already talked about the severe adverse health effects, emotionally, mentally, physically, and economically. We've already talked about all of that. But what we need to understand is, in essence, what we're doing is we are removing all risk. They're trying to get us to live this life in a bubble where nobody comes into contact with anything that's scary or dangerous, while at the same time creating this incredible amount of fear of catching a virus or seeing somebody without a mask on is going to just completely destroy our society in ways that we all as experts are trying to imagine what is coming, but in ways that even we cannot imagine. And so we cannot allow this to continue. We have enough evidence, we have enough science, facts, real data now to support going back to the status quo and living life as normal, and reminding everybody we cannot remove risk from our lives. It's part of life. And we are smart, we are intelligent, we are responsible individuals with freedom who can take care of ourselves, take care of our families. That is not the job of the government. The government's job is not to keep us safe from viruses. That is our responsibility, as one of the parents said so eloquently. We took care of ourselves, we took care of our families. And that's what we need to get back to, because this is so out of control, destroying an entire society and an economy over a virus that we now know is less deadly than a flu season is totally unacceptable. And we need to demand, not just ask, but demand that we be allowed to go back and function as normal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy. Dr. Witowski, before we... I'm going to ask you to unmute, sir. I apologize.
I would like to remind people of a very old principle that physicians used to follow, and that is first, do not harm. All these interventions are known to have substantial risks, especially for children. None of them has been proven to be effective. The FDA would never approve a drug that has such a bad risk-benefit ratio. So this is, one could say, unethical. It violates all medical principles. And as many people have said here, and I fully agree, there is no reason to maintain a new normal. We can go back to the old normal. The cases and the deaths are already declining all over the country. There is no indication that there is any substantial risk. So we should go back to the old normal and just live our lives, which may lead to death eventually.
Thank you, sir. And finally, Dr. McDonald, can I invite you for some closing thoughts?
Thank you. I know that people are afraid, and I know that we're trying to find some sort of solution that makes us feel good. But we have a responsibility as adults and as parents to reopen schools. we have never kept children from going to kindergarten, from going to camp, from going to college, from getting married, because we're afraid that there might be a bad outcome, that things might not go perfectly well. We have anxiety, we have fear, but we act in face of that fear because it's in the best interest of the children. This problem is about us as adults. It's not about them as children. We need to accept that and acknowledge that in order to make the best decisions and act in their best interests. I believe very strongly that given the importance of this reopening of schools, anyone who is opposed to it is either uninformed or is lying to you. There are no other explanations for opposition to reopening schools. So let's reopen them just as we did last year and the year before and the year before that. Let's step up as adults and as parents and not let the children down. That is our job. That is our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you to all of our teachers. Thank you to all of the parents. And again, thank you to our fearless lawyers, Kevin and Jim, that'll take us into this fight. If you want to get involved after hearing this, you know you need to get involved. Visit us at Urban Global Health Alliance. Get active, stay connected. I appreciate everyone's time today. I look forward to hearing and continuing the discussion. And I can't wait to go back to school as we did in 2019. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.